Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com. Of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by screenwriter Bill Kennedy, who is co-executive producer on Tell Me Lies Season 2, supervising producer on Season 3 of The Morning Show, as well as writer, and also worked on House of Cards for 5 seasons. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thanks for having me.
Um, I'd like to get into sort of your writing process when you're creating, because you also have created, you did Sex Ed, the feature film, you've done various pilots and everything. And so I'm wondering when you like what is your typical routine or approach to writing? Like I've talked to some writers who they write for 2 hours a day and then the rest of the day is sort of off, or talk to others who just sit there all day. How do you like to sort of get into your mindset for writing and approach it?
Um, I like to approach it by thinking of that there are by considering that there are many ways to write.
Mm,
So for some people, like writing is sitting in front of the computer with Final Draft open and like being tormented by the blank screen. And certainly there's a lot of that for me, for sure. But and then also I think there's also a lot of pressure when you're learning to write or even at my stage to like follow a very set process. Like, oh, you come up with your character bios and then you like outline the thing and then you critique the outline and then you go to the script and then you do your first draft. And I sort of do it all at once. My big thing is that like writers write, and so you should be doing some form of writing. For me, I try and do it like 6 hours a day, but like it's not necessarily sitting in front of the computer writing dialogue. It's like sometimes when yeah, I'm writing a feature right now, and there were certain scenes that I could just feel like I thought they were
mm,
so cool, and instead of like putting it off, I wrote those first. And then I sort of got to a point where I was like, okay, now my structure is a little wonky. I like the scenes I wrote. I'm gonna actually like go backwards. So I'm
yeah.
gonna take the scene and turn it into a paragraph for an outline, and then like start writing the outline. And then when I get stuck, because at some point writing an outline can just be the worst torture ever because it doesn't feel like screenwriting.
Hmm.
So, then I take a break and I try and write another couple scenes. And then at some point, I've been thinking about these characters. I think there's a lot of pressure also, like, oh, you should have your character, you should really know exactly who your characters are before you start writing. And I sort of find the characters when I write the scenes a little bit. So a lot of times I have to like then stop and then do the character bio. So like I've already written I've already written dialogue, I'm sort of halfway through an outline, I've got 20 pages of a script, but now like I'm realizing I don't have the sense of the character I wish I did. So now it's time to like then go back, you know. And sometimes like it doesn't follow that order either. Sometimes it starts with a character bio and then it goes to dialogue. But I think like the important thing is like when you get stuck, find a way to keep putting words on the page, whether that's like going back to an outline and going going from dialogue back to prose, or going from prose to dialogue, or thinking more about your characters or thinking more about their pasts. But just always sort of trying to put words on the page, even if the words on the page aren't going to end up being the script.
My friends and I would make little videos in our backyards, imitations of Indiana Jones and Star Wars. Eventually that need to tell stories became more of a technical interest and an interest in the art. To me, what's exciting is using cinema in its full potential, which is rhythm and sound design and music. Our job is to set up expectations and then deliver on them. I'm Brian Cates, and this is my course in film editing.
Hmm. So one of like when you're writing, do you, because whenever I talk to young people just starting out in writing, they're talking about structure a lot. So like, here's the hero's journey, here's the 3 act structure, here's the 5 act, and there's so many ways of or structuring it, or there's so many sort of, I guess, guidelines that people put out. Do you just sort of put those aside, like don't even think of them and just write and then sort of think about that later, or how do you think about that stuff?
I like it. It really is like kind of all at once, you
Yeah.
know? So like sometimes I think of an idea that I think is going to be an awesome midpoint of the movie. And I am big on structure. I love Save the
Mhm.
Cat. Like I think those things really work. I think they're really helpful ways of thinking about your writing. Um, but like I think you always have to be malleable. So like
Mhm.
and like I have to keep being excited. So like if I think something's supposed to hit at the midpoint, but I'm having trouble, like I'm like, how am I gonna fill 50 pages before I get to this exciting moment? A
Yeah.
lot of times that's like, oh shoot, this is either the end of the first act or maybe it's even on page 12,
Yeah.
you know? So I think it's sort of like you're dealing with all of this sand that you have to like turn into clay, that you have to eventually turn into a sculpture. And like if you spend like 2 hours or 3 hours like sculpting like the hand of your screenplay sculpture, because that's the thing that you're excited about, and then you get to the end of that time and you're like, okay, I actually realized that this hand needs to be holding a rope.
Yeah.
So I have to throw the hand out, but all the work you did on the hand is still good work. You know what I mean? It's
Mm.
so again, it is sort of like all at once. Like I'm just trying to like get excited and think about cool stuff that I want to see and then see how it all fits together.
So when you're crafting your characters, how much of it is it, like you hear about writers, whether it be novels or television or features, sometimes you write what you know. So a lot of times they might put themselves into the characters or write from their experiences. How much do you pull from your own experiences in life versus, coming up with something new or having to research something new to sort of create and craft your characters?
I certainly write from a lot from my own experience, but I think, just trying to be an empathetic person, I think
Hmm.
is key. Like trying to think about, when you read the news, trying to think about what this person was thinking when this thing happened. I find research to be extremely helpful in sort of telling you what colors to paint in, I guess. But um, at the end of the day, like you have to like understand like the emotional truth behind why someone is doing the thing they're doing.
Hmm.
Um, and I think you can sort of you can be the type of writer who says, I create my characters first, and they're the thing that makes the plot. Like,
Hmm.
and I think, what would my character do in this moment? And then that informs what the plot's going to be. Or you can be the type of writer who's really excited about plot, and then they have to back into the character. So they're like,
Hmm.
I really want to write a movie about a fireman who rescues a cat. Well, okay, that's the thing I'm excited about. Like, and then you write the sequence where the fireman rescues the cat, and it's awesome. Like, that's okay. It's okay that you don't know who the firefighter is. You might find him when you're writing that sequence, and you might also have to back into it. So
Hmm.
like sometimes you're starting at A and going to B, and sometimes you're more excited about B and you have to backfill A.
Yeah.
Um, but at the end, you really need to know all those questions need to be answered. Um,
Well, it's interesting because you kind of talked about, you sort of touched on it here, but one of the things that I love in writing, or the things that sort of attract me, is the gray areas, the areas where it's not necessarily, like someone has to do bad to do good, or something like that is always interests me. So like when you're writing a character that might be in that sort of gray area, it's got to be some kind of fine balance of, because you don't want to make them so bad that people are just like, I can't support this character anymore. They
mhm.
have to have something redeemable or something, um, that attracts us to keep watching. How do you approach something like that with a great character or a character in a great area?
I think we all have the potential for bad inside of us.
Mhm.
And I think the East of Eden is a real touchstone for me.
It's one of my favorite books.
Yeah, I love that book. I love that movie. And that's sort of the thing I come back to all the time is like, we all are like the question of whether you're good or bad is the question we're all wrestling with like every day. And,
Mhm.
in movies and TV, you're putting the characters into these more intense moments of that question. And I think like, yeah, I mean, I think you have to understand why someone's doing something bad or why someone's doing something good, and the sort of the logic behind it, it has to be emotional and spiritual.
Mhm.
You might do something because you might do something that a lot of people think is bad because of something your dad said to you when you were 10.
Yeah.
So I think understanding that in your character, even if it's vague, even if it's just for you, I think like we've been talking a lot about like independent writing, but I work with a lot of other writers on TV shows, and like sometimes like even if it's just in your head, like understanding why a character that someone else created is doing this thing is very helpful.
Okay, but I'm going to jump into the morning show because you did talk about working on shows and what have you. But I do want to mention, if you liked East of Eden, you might like the book, the Watch That Ends the Night.
Cool.
It's a Canadian book, but it's almost like they took 200 pages or 250 pages out of East of Eden type thing. But it's a difficult read. Well, at least I felt it was. But it's rewarding in the end.
Cool. Thank you.
So, how did you get involved with the morning show? How did you get onto that show?
Um, well, with every show they read a piece of writing that, and they consider the other shows you've worked on, and then there's a whole bunch of meetings with producers and most importantly the showrunner who is the
Mhm.
head writer of the show, um, to see like what if you would fit in, like what like every showrunner is sort of casting their writer's room in a way, like
Mhm.
trying to find like the right mix of people and the right sort of energies. And like speaking of writing what like I have written a lot about like very masculine, tortured characters that sort of have darkness that they're trying to deal with in some
Mhm.
way. Um, and, um, so in my meetings with the showrunner, I came prepared to talk to about all the characters, but the character
Mhm.
that I was most excited about writing for was Billy Crudup's character, because I was just so interested in him, and I'm so interested in those types of men who become the CEOs of companies. I think that there's like so much mystery actually about who they are, like deep down inside, like what their emotional truth is. Because I don't think that they're all narcissists and sociopaths. I think that a lot of them are very complicated people.
Mhm.
So like that was the thing I was really interested in investigating, and that was something I talked about in my interview to work on the show. And then also like coming out of House of Cards, and I worked on a number of other shows that didn't make it to air, and then also Tell Me Lies. Like I have a really good sense, I think, of story, and how to break story, and how not to be precious about the idea that you had that you thought was great 5 minutes
Mhm.
ago. And I think that I try and bring that energy to the meeting. So like I try and come up with an idea for the my future boss, and then top it in this like 5 minutes later, or throw it out, or
Yeah.
consider something totally different, just so that they can show like that's like my style. Like I try and you know um I try to be myself, because I feel like people are on the hunt for voices,
Yeah.
and um, And I think that, you know, my showrunner liked my writing, and she liked sort of my voice and the thing I brought into the meeting. And I think she was interested in what I had to say about Billy's character.
If you're allowed to talk about it, what do you think drives Billy's character? Like, what is it? Because, you know, I've met a few CEOs, and they're, like you said, they're not all, you know, psychopaths.
Mhm.
Although I have met a few that I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. I,
Uh,
I think that, you know, he's very driven by success, and he seems to like see the world as like he's playing three-dimensional chess and everyone else is playing two. And there's this playfulness with which he sort of uh, moves through the world and operates. You know,
mhm,
it always sort of seems like he's having the most fun out of anybody. Um, and um, I think a part of that is like in a very intense confidence.
mhm,
And um, and so I was like, how does a confidence like that get imbued in a person? And in my episode, like he goes back to see he has to deal with his mother about something.
mhm,
And so for me, that was something I was interested in. Like it was already canon. We had already established or other writers had established in the previous season that his mother, he was raised by a single mother who was a political operative who worked on campaigns.
mhm,
And so, you know, just with that sort of those colors to paint with, like became very obvious to me like what that relationship probably would have been like, you know. Like, and so like why is he trying to win? I think like he's trying to win all the time because he is trying to prove to his mom that he's good, you know.
mhm.
Um and I think that's ultimately like in talking about that character in the writers room, and it's not all my idea, by the way. Like
Yeah.
with a lot of great writers, and my showrunner was amazing. But um, you know, talking about who he is in the room, we talked a lot about um, this 3D chess piece, but also like he's so unflappable in the show.
Mhm,
He has this sort of like Gatsby-esque like aura, and that thematically is something we were very interested in this season. Like
mhm,
that's why he has the big house out in the Hamptons. You know, it's like his West Egg. That's why he's throwing the big party at his house to sort of show Bradley like what she's missing out on. Um, and so what is the thing that's really going to throw him? And we start to see him get a little thrown by the fact that like he makes some bad decisions because he's been rejected by Bradley, but he's
mhm.
still sort of in control. So like what's the thing this season that's really going to mess him up? Or really going to make him like sort of not be able to see the whole chessboard like he always can. And for me, that was going home to see his mom and being shaken by that.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about. I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now. Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
That's really interesting. I'd be interested to know, like, because I've never written on a TV show, if you haven't noticed. But like when you're working in the writer's room, right? Like, I guess, can you give me a sense of what the writer's room is like for the morning show? Like, how are like is everyone's just sort of throwing out ideas for the episodes, trying to figure it out, and then it's assigned to one person, or how did you guys sort of break it down?
Well, first of all, it's different for every show, and every showrunner has a different way of working. And as long as the show's good, it's like all the ways work.
Yeah.
I would say on the morning show in particular, um, it felt like our boss, Charlotte Stout, who was amazing, and she sort of cast the room and sort of knew who she was going to turn to for particular tasks, and also sort of like when you're in the room breaking an episode. So you go into the room and you start breaking episodes, and it starts to emerge, like usually like you can kind of tell who's going to write that episode because they just like there's something about the episode that's speaking to them. And once that's sort of decided, if it's not your episode, your job is to sort of come in and support that person and help them find their blind spots and help them work their way through story that's tripping them up. And on the morning show, like if it was your episode, you were very much, you know, it was a very seasoned and experienced room. So everyone had worked in TV before, so they sort of knew what they needed help with. And so we usually spend like 4 or 5 days in the room as a big group, creating the 2 or 3 big storylines for the episode. And in general, it's like, I would describe it as like the person who's writing the episode, is for like a military analogy, is like the XO, like and then the showrunner is the general. So like the general is kind of like overseeing like the strategy of like what's going on, but the person who's writing the episode is sort of executing the orders or executing the vision. And so the showrunner, and so depending on who that writer is, also like some writers are great in the room. Like on that show, there were writers who really wanted to use the room. And then there are some writers who they like being in the room, but then they really got to write by themselves. And that show was cool because like everyone sort of got to do the thing they needed to do. So I sort of fall in the middle of that. So like when it was my episode, I had a good idea of what I thought I wanted to do, and that was something that I had already been talking to the showrunner about. And then, you know, I used the room to help me like come up with the story and these bigger ideas and fill in the blanks with some of the characters that I sort of can't speak to quite as well. And then on this show, like I went off and I wrote a beat sheet, and every show's different. Sometimes you do a beat, but for me, it's like at some point I have to start the writing thing. And so I write the beat sheet, and that's like sort of a sales document to my showrunner and my fellow writers. A lot of these things are like that you're writing, especially in TV. And actually all screenwriting is writing sales documents. You know, like you're selling the thing. So like this beat sheet is like you're selling the thing to your boss and the other writers, and everybody picks it apart, you know, and then you go back and you refine it. And then at some point you're like, okay, now I need to get into like what these scenes are. Then you write the outline, same thing. Like then you're sending it. Usually the boss is the showrunners reviewing these things before they go wide to the room, just to make sure like it's working from their perspective before like it gets worked by the bigger group. And then and then by the end of this process, you have an outline that's like 15 pages long, and you're writing a 60-page script. And so like a lot of it's in the outline. There's still like magic to find in the dialogue and the way you write the scenes, but a lot of it's there already, and it's been vetted by a lot of very smart people that you're working with.
I do have to ask then, so your approach when you write, is you like to sort of tackle a scene that you really like, or, you know, an idea that you have, you sort of jump on that first, even if it's the last scene or somewhere in the middle. So when writing for the morning show, was there a particular scene that was your scene? You're like, I just got to jump on that one first?
Well, I guess I would add a caveat to everything I said in the earlier interview, which is like, that's the way I work when I'm by myself.
Okay.
Or when I'm like writing a pilot or a feature. When I'm in a room, like you do sort of have to stick to like a little more. I'm not sending a scene, like a single scene, to like my colleagues and asking them what they think about it. I think it's sort of running in my head.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the most interesting stuff to me was like, it was very interesting. I mean, I guess the two things that I identified that I was excited about in the episode are, what does it mean for Jennifer Aniston and John Hamm to fall in love with each other? Like, and I think that thematically is like, it resonates with the show, and it's also something that like we're equipped to talk about more than any other show on the planet, because like, you know, we do deal with these big movie stars who do have these like huge pressures around their love lives. So like that was something I think that Jennifer Aniston was interested in and excited about. So like there was that piece, like figuring out like how hard it is for these two people to like just date normally. So I like there were scenes and moments and things that were exciting to me that like, you know, a lot of times in the early writing process, you're making note cards for scenes. So like I had some note cards for them, you know, for things that I was excited about. And then, you know, I put those up on the board. And then I was really excited about like Bradley and Corey going home to see his mom. And I had some note cards for that, and I put that up. But there was a lot of blank space in between those things. And if I was by myself, maybe I would have written those scenes first and then filled in but since I was in the room with my colleagues, like, you know, a lot of times like I'll turn to writing dialogue when I feel stuck. I don't feel stuck when I'm in the writer's room, because I've got this team of very smart people who can unstick me. So I don't have to write a scene before I can go back to that line, because I have these people I can talk to about how to connect all these dots that I think are, you know, are going to work.
Now, you've been really generous with your time, so I have two more questions for you. The first one is, you know, you've mentioned a couple books here, East of Eden and The Great Gatsby. I'm wondering, is there a particular book that you hold dear?
Definitely East of Eden. I mean, we already talked about that though. And I really love Angle of Repose. I think that's a very cool. I love that book. It's Wallace Stegner, and it's about a young couple in the West. The husband's like a mining engineer, and his wife is an artist, and it's just about their marriage over 30 years and the sort of ups. And it's very subtle and interesting, and it like gives you a sense of, you know, I guess I find myself, when I read, turning to things where the plot moves are smaller, because in my work, my plot moves have to be so big. To remind myself sometimes that like you can turn an entire story on the way someone kisses you goodnight. You know, it doesn't have to be a car bomb going off. So I think I go back. That's what I look for in literature, I think, is like those really small turns. So yeah.
So my final question for you then is, what would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Yeah, I mean, so like I think I'm being pretty consistent here. I think my like favorite guilty pleasure is like, I love those like early Jerry Bruckheimer action movies. Like
They're amazing.
The Rock, Con Air. Like I just love seeing dudes beat each other up and shit explode. I love it. I love it.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.